Okay, so we are talking about population ecology now. So within the biomes, how do things interact? How do they compete with each other? And what's going to limit growth? So even in looking at our shrimp, brine shrimp lab, there are going to be factors eventually that are going to limit the growth. Obviously, space would be one of them, and resources would be another. So looking at the things that allow for population growth, which is important to consider, considering like how quickly human population growth has exploded. It doubling, every certain 100 years. It's been doubling now, which is pretty incredible considering we're at around 7 billion. So population, just a redefinition. I'm not going to underline anything on it. It's just live in an area together. Maybe I will underline something on it. Just remember, it's a population is not like you can say the human population across the whole world, but really we're looking at more of a specific area. So when we talk about a particular habitat in one certain location around the world. Demography is going to be the study of populations, and specifically when we look at demography, we'll look at human population. That's what we study the most. Predictions, we can make predictions based on the qualifications of any environment. So like what's in the environment, we can predict based on the number of resources, based on sunlight, based on like a mark recapture sampling, which means that you, like if you ever heard or watch like Discovery Channel, where they'll mark aquatic organisms like a shark, and then they'll kind of look at populations within that community and say, why are they thriving? Why are there a lot of them here? Or why, what's limiting their growth? Why would a species become endangered? We can look at all of that. So this should say 5. Really, there are 5 key features of population. So size, that has to do with like how many, and really how big is the environment, which plays out in the second one, density, how many individuals per unit space. So if we're looking at 1,000,000 people, we could say 1,000,000 people, that's a lot. Well, you don't know, because 1,000,000 people in a state, that's not that many. 1,000,000 people in downtown Dallas, that's a lot of people. Or it wouldn't be Dallas, it'd be New York or Chicago or LA, a bigger city. But if the feel is different, well, imagine that with smaller organisms. Like, we don't think about ants or insects per unit space. If there's only so much food to go around, eventually some are going to starve. Even if you look in other countries at animals, like stray dogs or cats, if you go to South America, there are strays everywhere, and they'll look sickly just because if there are that many on the streets, they're all fighting for the same resources. And so, unfortunately, some are going to have to die off, because kind of the strong will survive. The ones that have a competitive advantage are going to get the food and water or whatever else is the limiting resource. Dispersion, how scattered or clumped together within within a certain geography they are. Growth rate, so reproductive rate. A lot of this has to do with gestational period, meaning like for humans it takes 9 months. For a cat or a dog it takes 60 days, and they're going to have 5, 6, 7 puppies, whereas we only have one. So the growth rate for like bacteria, if you've seen, is exponential. Once you get a certain number there, they can reproduce really quickly if there's other members of the same species. And then age structure, distribution of various ages is also really important, which I'll do this on a chart, how that works. So again, this should be 5. Number of individuals in an area, just how many of them there are. 3, and just cross it off to be 5 on any. The growth rate is the birth rate minus the death rate. You will need to do a problem. It's just saying it's a plus minus system. An easy question I could ask, if the death is greater than the birth rate, what say about the population. If you think that, let's say this is just plug in, and 80, well, 80 minus 100 is negative, so you have a um, negative growth rate at that. So how many individuals are born versus how many die? And you could probably think about some of the factors that are going to influence how many are born versus how many die. It could be education. It could be, when people are having sex, protection, just stopping people from getting pregnant. Goals within the country, socioeconomic status in other countries, not as many people, and especially women, don't work as much. That's a generalization, but I'm saying comparatively to the US, a lot higher number of women, and this is even increasing. I don't know if you know, but the age that most people give birth now compared to the 1950s, is like 8 or 9 years more. Women just wait longer because of things that they're doing, and you guys are all educated, and oftentimes will get a job and prolong marriage, and then after marriage, most people wait a little bit longer than they used to. So all these things play a role in populations that we don't even think about. So birth rate minus death rate is just rate of natural increase. So just how, without any like a plague that wipes out a population, this is just purely looking at right now, what is the rate? Are there more births or are there more deaths? And again, you'll need to do a simple math problem with it. Rapid growth. So you can see, looking at the percent of population of the age. So look at the ages here. You can see that in a place like Kenya, the majority of people are going to be under the age of 14, which you think about this, I would give you a scenario. Kenya must have an incredible birth rate. Will you think about why? Well, they're not going to have the resources. If they don't have the resources to eat or put food on the table, they're not going to have resources to necessarily, protect themselves against getting pregnant, nor might they want to. In the U.S., we might view getting pregnant differently, which I think would be pretty logical. So they're going to have the majority of their population is less than 14, but you see here it gets a lot narrower. If you were in class, I would ask you why. You can probably imagine that their healthcare and technology and all the things that they would need for their population to age well, or surgery, or medicine if they get an infection, isn't available. So they have a very percentage-wise, remember this is all based on percent of population, is going to be very low relative to the young population. Ours, it's fairly flat. We more or less we are growing in the U.S., but it's drastically slowed. It's almost birth rate and death rate are almost equal because people are living 15, 20 years longer than they did 100 years ago, and people have slowed in giving birth. So you think of the baby boom generation. Why is it called that? Everyone had 5 kids. Now the average is like 2.1 or something like that. The number of deaths and births almost equal each other. And then Italy, the same. You look that this is almost like this. The percentage of people that are 0 to 4 years old are going to be almost equal to 80 plus. Density, cross this off. Measurement of population per unit. So now we are taking into account the size of the area. So again, 3 individuals in this area or 3 in this area are very, very different. These guys are going to feel like it's more of a crowd versus these guys, the 3, but we increase the area. And so density is huge for populations because of competition. So population density, number of individuals divided by unit space. Again, I would probably give you a simple math problem with this. Very simple numbers, like 2 meters is the unit of space versus number of individuals 4. And I would say and there's 4 individuals, 4 meter space. Well, how is the population going to feel differently? Well, you divide these both and equal 2 per meter, and this is going to equal per meter. It's very different. So in essence, these guys 2 times as cramped because there's less space. Another thing that affects immigration versus emigration, a hot topic, with the GOP debate versus the Democrats, looking at immigration and all, you think about that, think about it in terms of ecology. All those people fighting for jobs. Well, what is a job? It provides resources for you to live, and that's where the debate comes in. So think about this in terms of the real world. The immigration, movement of individuals into a population versus immigration is out of a population. We have very few individuals. Um, we have very few individuals moving out of the U.S. just because we do have so many resources. We're very blessed to be in the country we are. I don't know if you feel that way, but from a resource perspective, we can keep it purely factual. We have a lot of resources. We really don't think as much about food and where water is going to come from, the biggest limiting resource of any country. We really don't think about those things versus other countries do. So that's going to play a role. If we've got 50 people crossing the border a day versus 2 leaving, you have 48. Well, you're like, 40, well, I'm not even going to feel that. Well, 365 days a year, and obviously 50 is not the number. We're talking thousands. Well, now you're talking thousands of people, and all of those people are competing for space and land and resources and money and jobs, which is all going to affect everyone. In particular, Texas, because the border isn't far from here. Not getting into a political debate, all I'm saying is we can use ecology to think about why there is a debate to begin with. Should we allow immigration? Should we allow immigrants? Or is that going to cause too high of a density in certain locations that then is going to affect the existing population? Density dependent factors, so things that depend on density, um, disease, competition, which I was talking about, and parasites, and parasites, which are all things that are going to directly depend on the density, like within an area. So the more people there are, the more animals there are, disease is going to have a chance to wipe them out quicker just because individuals are closer together. You think about how disease spreads, it's going to be contact. And so it will definitely depend on density, and then parasites as well. Parasites can move from person to person or thing to thing. Density independent factors are going to be abiotic factors like temperature and weather. They do not depend on the density whatsoever. They are what they are, but they will affect the population. They're just not going to, whether there's 10 or a million, it's not going to, it's not dependent on how many individuals there are. So natality is just births, mortality, a pictorial. Some people like pictorials, the plus minus system. So these two are going to work together to population and are going to increase population growth. How things are dispersed. So you can see clumped clusters like fish here. You can see spread out uniform, kind of that there's no groupings necessarily bigger than others, or random, which is kind of a mix. There might be clumps, there might be individuals, which we see a lot of with plants based on seed dispersion. Is kind of random based on wind patterns, which can change all the time. So just dispersion, clumped, uniform, and random. How are populations measured? So population density, again, given area or volume, how many per unit area. You can either count all the individuals in a population, which is easy for like humans. It's going to be harder for insects. Estimate by sampling. So take a size, look at a 2 mile and kind of like what you might do in your well plate. So you're going to, actually, that's probably not a good example because you'll be able to count those. But if we had thousands and we had like a tub, thousands of brine shrimp, you might want to take one section of that tub, this is the whole tub, take section and say that there are 50, and then divide that into 4 boxes. So 50 times 4, there are 200 in that particular tub. So that's taking a sample size and then estimating throughout an entire population, or the mark recapture method, where you basically tag something. It needs to be something big enough that you could mark that you have already counted them, and then just kind of these are going to be things that are constantly moving from area to area, and doing your best to mark them and then recapture them and see just emigration patterns, and how many are living in an area. So these are models. A model is a prediction. This is not necessarily real. This is estimating based on current populations, current resources available, and all the other factors involved to predict what a population will look like 5 minutes, 5 years, 500 years down the road. Exponential growth is going to be what's called a J curve. This is going to occur in an ideal environment, as if there were no limiting factors. And logistic growth is going to call an S curve, where there's going to be resources that cap population growth. So you're going to see it run right along that line. Carrying capacity is the maximum population size to be supported. So eventually, like human population growth, there's debate on this, because is the Earth supporting all the individuals? Well, some people could say yes, they're not dying off in a place like Kenya. And another person would say, like, you look at the devastation and the poverty in certain areas, and while they're barely hanging on, those people are dying. So there is some debate on what the maximum population size is, or redistribution of resources. We have a lot of resources, we have a lot of wealth, which is why a lot of people call for the redistribution, or giving to those other people, because really our carrying capacity hasn't been met. There's just more resources in a certain area, so those people are thriving versus other people are suffering or dying off from disease and lack of water and food and shelter. So only as many organisms as an environment can support. Again, that's debatable, because certain environments, if we let all the people from Kenya and then redistributed the wealth, we could say that the carrying capacity is now increased because of the fact that resources have been distributed. I'm not advocating for that. I'm not advocating for socialism. We've seen how that's gone in the world. I'm just trying to relate it to other subjects so that you can see where ecology plays a role in human populations. So exponential growth, really oftentimes we're going to see it with bacteria. Don't worry about this little equation. We could calculate this, but basically you see the shape curve where there are unlimited resources, and that reproductive bacteria can take over your body. It can take over an area if there's a nutrition source. You see, we're going to use exponential factors, 2 to the 6, this number, how many bacteria there could be within a certain amount of time, again, if there is enough food for them. Logistic growth is more where it caps off where the resources are. So there's no more food. Look at all these guys. Well, eventually the number of fish that they feed on or other animals is going to cap off. So maybe at 5 they're fine. At 100 they're fine. 5 they're fine. At 5,000 there should theoretically be a lot less food to go around. Well, now all the fish that were available here, these guys eat 30. Well, now there's 70 fish. Depending on the reproductive rate of the fish, now we have less fish to reproduce with each other, because all the seals are eating them. So now it's going to be like a give and take. Now 25 of these start. Well, now the fish can go back up. Now this can support a little bit more. Now that the fish are reducing, now we go back up to that, and that's why eventually it's level off right where the food supply is, so that you're not going to see this up and down fluctuation. So factors that influence growth rate, food is obviously going to be one of them. Toxic environment, things that we do to the environment definitely affect a lot of other species. Disease is huge. Bubonic plague. I don't know if you've heard that the plague kind of reinvented itself, and we've seen some cases in like Yellowstone and other parks. If you don't know, like from rats, it's a bacteria in rats that caused millions of deaths back in the day. And then predation, predators, just certain animals eliminating other species by eating them. There's also booms and busts sometimes. So the snowshoe hare, you see here that the snowshoe hare, the lynx had a boom here. So then the population of lynx up because they're food. These can definitely increase in size, but now the above because this have hit a level that eating too many snowshoe hares. So it goes down. So what do you see happen to the lynx population? It goes down. So they follow each other, they track each other. So if they're looking at predation, if there's a lot of food source, then the corresponding predator was going to have more food. So the environment can just support more. The carrying capacity increases. Distribution of males and females is also huge. Is there an equal number? Because in some countries, they try and limit a certain gender. And so the ability to reproduce is essential for population growth and the carrying on of a species. So the distribution of males and females, you can even look at a college. I know some people do, and talking to seniors, that certain colleges are heavily weighted one towards the other, which does influence relationships. Just think about it in terms of relationships. There's more boys to go around, so that's great for the females. There's more girls to go around, so that's great for the males. Will you carry that out in a population and you talk about reproduction, again, it's going to be big for how quickly that S-shaped curve is it going to be like that? Is it going to be like this? Those things all change based on these factors. And this is just used to predict future population growth. So the baby boom generation, you can look at millions of persons. Basically what this is showing you is 2020, what the number of individuals are going to be at a certain age, and you look at 80 and above, we have a lot more than we would have even in 2000 because of technology and all our environment. Thinking about climate change, thinking about what we do, toxic runoff from factories. We process what we do to the environment, and because of that, it's going to increase age of the average person. So right now, human population growth in the J curve, 80 million yearly. You think about that, 80 million yearly. So you multiply it out over 10 years, and you have 800 million people for a decade, which is incredible. And that's largely because we have defeated many things that killed off. So you think about like polio and smallpox and things that aren't a big deal because of vaccinations, which I never understand why vaccinations, they're linked to autism. That's been completely shown not to be true as falsified evidence, which is why you need to be really careful what you read. I understand vaccination schedules, but the people that say, I'm completely anti-vaccine. You look at the world 50 years ago versus what it is now. When's the last time you saw somebody with polio? Maybe if you took a trip with your family or an Ursun trip, maybe you saw somebody, but I guarantee you haven't seen anybody recently versus, 50, 75 years ago, you saw people all over the place. So a lot of it has to do with development of our environment, cultural revolution, agricultural, so more resources, cultural, social factors, looking at education, and even contraception, and looking at just how many births there were or how many deaths there were even in giving birth. And now we have really kind of solved all those things with C-sections and sanitation and everything else. So it's doubled 3 times in the last 3 centuries. So every 100 years we've been doubling. So 6.1 billion, really this is more like 7 billion now, and reach 9.3 billion by 2050. Whether we will have something else that wipes out a huge chunk of our population is yet to be seen, like bacteria. So health and technology, again, have low death rates. They're huge death rates. You can see a little blip here with the plague when we did lose millions of people. So this is in billions, but you can see exponential growth. Again, the more people can reproduce, a higher density go to work, and there's like 5 people per 3 meters. There's people everywhere. Just is going to equal and lower disease. limiting users because we have more resources because of our advances in technology for agriculture and everything else is just going to lead to a curve. Eventually, there's going to be a time where we run out of resources, and I can't tell you, is it going to be in 1,000 years, which seems like a long time, or 100 years? We don't know. But I personally think with what we do with antibiotics and their resistance to so many antibiotics that we will see another thing that knocks out a chunk of the population, which then, it might produce an S-shaped curve versus a J. It might level off because bacteria could kill off, our crops, which we even see now, which is why we use insecticides and pesticides. But then there's the organic revolution, that's kind of come back to that, like looking at our health. So there's all, if there's one thing I want you to take away from this, there's all these different factors that affect population growth.